Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Institute of Mental Health here at York University. It's a real pleasure to see everyone here today, and I'm particularly delighted to welcome Bruce Mao, who has joined the Dr. Institute as a community fellow for this year, and who is leading a series of seminars over the coming year on design and global health. We're calling it the Massive Action Global Health Design Seminar Series. I'm the director of the Dodley Institute for Global Health Research. And as I said, my name is James Ravinsky. And I would like to begin, before we go any further, by doing what we always do here at the Dodley Institute, which is acknowledge the indigenous land that we're on. And I would just encourage people, as this is a hybrid event, some guests are on different territories, so please do take the time to give thanks and respect to the land on which you're currently living and working. So today, we're here at York University campus in Toronto, and we're situated on the traditional territorial area known as Takaronto, and we acknowledge its current treaty holders. These are the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation people. We also acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, which include the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat, and of course, the Métis. This territory that we're on is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And I think that's a fantastic beginning to this seminar series, and particularly to today. Bruce is a world-renowned designer. He is a person who I first met in 2006. I still am, a professor at University of Toronto at that time, and one of my grad students came to me and said, "James, you gotta go to the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario. There's this exhibit. You've got to see it. It's called Massive Change." And I thought, exhibit, art, I'm a scientist, what does that have to do with me? You know? He said, "No, you really have to see this." So I went. I went to the AGO, which is down the street from my office at U of T. And I have to tell you, I was blown away. I actually called in sick for the rest of the week. I canceled all my appointments and everything else. And I went back to the AGO every single day for 5 days straight. And I walked through the exhibit. Each piece, I looked at each piece, I read all of the text associated with each piece. There was a book available in the bookstore. I read the book. The exhibit absolutely blew me away. The exhibit was really about how to reimagine the world and how to reimagine possibility in the world that we were in 2006. And what struck, I'll just try to encapsulate in one phrase. The great phrase that I remember most explicitly from the exhibit was Bruce's phrase that said, "It's not about the world of design. It's about design of the world." How do we think about the world we're in so that we can create the world that we wish to be in? How do we move from here to there? And the exhibit basically cut across a whole series of domains of knowledge: materials, processes, industrial practices, supply chains, global supply chain, and really just offered a different vision, a way of imagining a world of possibility. Now that exhibit really, really influenced me personally in all of my work from that point on. Fast forward a year, I had started an organization called Dignitas, which was focused on providing aged care and redesigning health systems in Malawi and in the southern region of Africa around HIV. And we redesigned and reimagined how to approach HIV in Malawi. And at that time, HIV or AIDS had infected 18% of the population. And that's a huge number of people. And people were literally dying in the hundreds of thousands every year of HIV in Malawi. And at that time, there were, there were 370 doctors in the entire country of Malawi. At that time, the population was about 18 million. In Ontario, just to give you a comparative, the population of Ontario is about 18 million. We have 27,693 doctors for our 18 million people. In Malawi, obviously, an order of magnitude lower than what we have here. So you have to think about the problem differently, and that's what we did. In Toronto, where Dignitas was based, we had a big fundraising event during the TIFF Film Festival in 2006, I believe it was, or 2007, can't quite remember. But I was at the fundraising event, and all kinds of people there, and lots of tuxedos, champagne, very rich people giving money and so on. And it was a little cocktail event just before the dinner. And I was talking to someone, and this person said, so how do you think about what it is? Like, why did you do the thing that you did? Why did you do it that way? And I said, well, I saw this exhibit a year ago. It was called Massive Change, and it just blew my mind. It was by this guy, Bruce Mao, and I just love to meet him. And Bruce, oh, that's me. And from that point on, we've had, I think, a very rich, deep, and growing friendship and collaboration on how to think about design, how to think about the thing it is that you're doing, and how to think about the thing that it is that you want to achieve. And so with that, Bruce is truly a world-renowned designer who has achieved great things thus far, and who, despite the opportunity that often presents itself for people who have accomplished great things, the opportunity to sort of sit back and enjoy, the benefits of the things they have done. Bruce continues to be an iconic thinker and an iconic leader, a person who's literally at the edge of the challenges that we all face. And one of the greatest challenges that we face today is how to reimagine our relationship with the world that we are in, how to reimagine our relationship with the nature that we are of, and that we belong to, and that we cannot exist without. And that really calls us to a different way of relationship, a different way of seeing, a different way of being in relationship to each other as human beings, but also in relationship to the biosphere, which again gives life to us and is the life from which and in which we exist. For Bruce, he's going to talk today as the first in a series of seminars about caring. And I just remind everyone that in the land acknowledgement, the agreement, the Wampum Belt Covenant Agreement, is an agreement to share and to care for the land on which we live, and to share and care for the ecosystem within which we exist. So I'm very, very excited about this design series. And I will say, I'm not going to go through your extensive biography. It's available, people can certainly read it. But I will say just a couple of things. One is that this is the first of a series of seminars. We have 6 seminars, so this is the first. We're going to have where Bruce will talk about global health design as he imagines it, in terms of some very simple and, well, I won't say simple, but in terms of some very basic core principles. We then have 4 case studies, 1 case study for each of the subsequent seminars. And those case studies are examples of either existing research that's taking place here at the school, at the Dodla Institute of Global Health, or examples of planned research that we are beginning to undertake this academic year, and for which we have really a 5 to 7 year, depending on the project, a time horizon. So each of those seminars are real opportunities to infuse and to bring design principles and practice to the research that we're engaging in. And the first seminar, the first case study, or the next seminar, will be on youth and planetary well-being. We have a whole program that we're starting around, it's called Rooted and Rising. It's about how to engage youth so that they are supported in their imaginings and in their activism around planetary health and their engagement with the issue of global warming, or what I now call global boiling, and the issue of ecological degradation. The second seminar, case study, will be on what we call One Health approaches to limiting antimicrobial drug resistance. Antimicrobial drug resistance is a huge and growing global problem. If we don't get it under control, many scores of millions of people will die because of emerging antimicrobial drug resistance. The approach that we're taking is one that takes into account the biosphere, the ecosphere, the domain of non-human animals, and then human animals, how human beings behave, and the choices that we make in our uses of antibiotics. And what we're trying to do is develop an approach to global governance around antimicrobial drug resistance that takes into account that particular perspective, that One Health perspective. The third case study will be led by Dr. Imran Ali here at the end of the table, and it will focus on safe water optimization tools that we have developed here at the Institute for use in humanitarian crises. The biggest health threat in humanitarian crises is waterborne infectious disease. It actually accounts for about 50% of mortality in humanitarian crises. Imran and our team have developed a series of tools that use artificial intelligence, existing data sets, and digital platforms, combine those technologies to essentially diagnose how much chlorine is required to reduce waterborne infectious disease pathogens in a bucket if you're going down to the river and getting your water, or in a 1 million liter bladder tank if you're the Red Cross or MSF providing water in a refugee camp. So we're now working on the second generation of those tools, and that is what we're going to workshop in our case study, which is the third. And then the final case study will be led by Dr. Jude Kong, who's here today, professor here at York, professor of mathematics. And that case study will focus on the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning for better clinical public health outcomes in Africa, across many parts, not all of Asia, but many parts of Asia, and across many parts of South America. And this is a very, very exciting opportunity that we might hear a little bit about today, but if we don't, that's fine. We are going to case study and workshop that idea. The final seminar, which will be in April, will be an opportunity for Bruce and our students to reflect together on what we have learned and what we have gleaned from the seminar series around approaches to design and global health. With that, I do, before asking Bruce to begin the seminar today, I want to particularly thank our organizing committee. We have a really vibrant and committed group of people who have pulled this together in actually a very short time. The opportunity arose and we seized it. And we took initiative, which is fantastic. And I would just like to thank Professor Chital Desai at the Department of Design, Professor Angela Norwood also at the Department of Design, especially Shauna Schutz here at Dodley Institute for incredible support to faculty and also to students in bringing this forward. And then I'd also like to specifically thank Michelle, Yashini, and Teresa for their support to this process. And with that, I am going to stop blithering on and just turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you all for coming. I would echo the land acknowledgement that it was really exciting to hear the idea of the lakes. It's really, I proposed for the Shed Aquarium a project to declare the park of the Great Lakes watershed. Really think about the whole watershed as something that we ought to protect and preserve. So it's something that I think I'm happy to be part of. And thank you, James, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be part of this. I think what you're doing here, the kind of ambition of the Institute, caliber of the people and the work is really extraordinary. And thank you, Teresa, for making it happen. It's been really kind of seamless from my side. So I wanted to begin by talking about caring. That several years ago I was asked to do the lecture for the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. Once a year they commission a lecture about their collection. And so I began by looking at their collection, and what I saw was an incredibly disparate collection of objects that of all kinds. I mean, these two things is a collapsible cane for people who have impairment of sight, and a chair by Werner Patton. These objects of such diversity, and you can see that that they have plenty of applications in the medical field. But what I realized was that the common denominator among all the objects, no matter what they were, from carpets to cities, really, was caring. That the thing, I asked myself, like, why is something in the collection? Like, what makes it a special thing that warrants being in the Cooper Hewitt Design Collection? And you realize that the thing that really makes it a good design, is caring, and that's the real common denominator. And that ultimately is the common denominator in design. That the kind of core operating system in design is caring. That what you're really doing, if you think about the kind of process of thinking and working, is you're thinking about someone having an experience, and you're designing that experience, and you're anticipating their experience, and you're caring about what that experience is. So we begin by caring for that person, but if we care for that person, we can't have a healthy person in a toxic community. You can't have a healthy person in a toxic community. You can't have a healthy community in a toxic ecology. And for me, when as I began to think that through, I realized that it really explains why so many designers are involved in so many of the kind of important conversations of our time. That designers are so often engaged in the conversations, in the kind of ecological movements, the social justice movements, etc. They're actually in there. And for me, it was really kind of instrumental in my own process of thinking to realize that we really need to work holistically, that you can't actually solve the problem of the object. You can't solve the problem of the user experience. You don't think about it more holistically and really work out from there, think about it more comprehensively.
Brucey?
Huh? How do I get rid of it? That's an escape. There we go. There we go.
Well, while you're doing it, I can fill in some time here just by saying that I will let people know a little bit about Bruce's biography. Bruce is the co-founder of the Massive Change Network, which is a holistic design collective that's based in Chicago. He's also founder of Bruce Mao Studio and the innovator in residence at Freeman Company. And in the last 30 years or so, Bruce has collaborated with global brands and companies, with leading organizations, with heads of state, with renowned artists and fellow optimists. He was first came to sort of international renown through a book that he published with Rem Koolhaas called Small, Medium, Large, and Extra Large. And from there, I think you've published about 25 books.
No, not so many. I have about a dozen books.
A dozen books, okay.
That are authored.
They're just very thick, so they seem like fun. And he's author of, there's two books I just want to mention. One is MC24, Massive Change 24, so it's 24 design principles of massive change, the exhibit that I talked about, and all of the learnings that Bruce has since that exhibit. That book it's brilliant. It's beautiful and brilliant. The other book I just want to mention is his most recent book. It's called Nexus, which is also beautiful and brilliant.
Yeah, I'll put some.
Yeah, and so I won't say anything about that. You're okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to you.
Yeah. So if we think about that, if we think about that kind of shift, from the kind of object to the kind of broader view, it really is a shift from object to ecology, and that really is a kind of fundamental change in the kind of purview and approach of design, and that's really what we're looking at. And in 1992, we published a book at Zone, which is one of the kind of biggest projects that I did. Really, the kind of project that I started my practice on with Sanford Quinter. We published a book called Zone 6 Incorporations, and that concept of incorporations really is the kind of game changer. Everything and every individual emerges, evolves, and passes away by incorporating and being incorporated into other emerging, evolving, or disintegrating structures that surround and suffuse it. Indeed, incorporation might be the name of the new primary logic of creation and innovation in our late modern world. In other words, the idea of a kind of singular, discrete object is a falsehood. The idea that you can actually make a thing that is separate from the rest of the world is false. This thing is actually made of a flow of matter and energy that becomes this thing. And it is in itself connected into bigger flows of matter and energy. And it's a kind of, we kind of see it as an object because that's a useful fiction. But in reality, it's actually incorporated into these bigger flows, and it itself incorporates flows. So just as an example, we think of this thing as using almost no energy. We plug it in, it's almost no. But in fact, running a phone is like running a refrigerator. Your phone uses as much energy as a refrigerator because all the apps that you use somewhere there's a refrigerator worth of energy happening to support your gameplay. So that kind of, you can sort of see that object in reality is an ecology. And you yourself are more non-human than human. You are more non-human cells than human cells by sheer number. So you're actually, Paul Stamets, the great mycologist, says, I am the elected representative of the community of life forms that I represent. So this kind of idea fundamentally changes what we're doing and kind of how we see where we are in the universe. And what it means is no more externalities. The idea of an externality is, if I can't solve it, I'm going to put it somewhere else. I'm going to take it off my desk and I'm going to put it on someone else's desk. I'm going to make it their problem. If I drive my car and it exhausts fumes that are toxic, I'm not going to pay for it. I'm not going to worry about it. It's going to go out the back of my car. And it's going to become your problem, and you're going to have to pay for it. And so I'm not going to deal with that. It's an accounting concept that was designed so that I could close my books, and I wouldn't have to worry about all the problems I was creating. And it allowed us to do the worst possible things. But in reality, there is no externality. There is no exterior to the natural world. There's nowhere to dump something. So out of sight, out of mind, which is still the operating system of design, does not really exist in the natural world. The reality is that it's about life. Right? It's not our life, but all of life. And if you remember Copernicus, right, Copernicus was the first person to say, it's not about us. Like the universe does not revolve around us. He was the first to say, actually, it looks like the universe revolves around the sun. We're actually turning around the sun. And he was able to show that the reason that Mars sometimes goes backwards in the sky was that we're turning around the sun, and so is Mars. And then Galileo proved it with math, and the scientific method was born. Copernicus waited to the very last minute to publish that, because he knew that it would be, his head might roll, because he was basically saying the whole kind of center of the universe, having humans be the center of the universe and having the Pope be the center of the universe was in question. But this idea that actually we're not the center of the universe was established by Copernicus, but it somehow feels like we've been trying to prove him wrong ever since. So for most of us, when we think about design, we still think about objects that we can see. So that's how we kind of define design. We don't think about the vast majority of our life experience. We think about something like this. This is designed, this is designed, this is designed, that's designed. We can see them, those are designed things. And we make two mistakes. Right? We might think about fashion, but not factory. We don't think about the factory as design, we think about the fashion as design. We might think car, but not commute, or the infrastructure or the energy. We don't think about the energy that we need to sustain our car. We don't think about that as design, we think the car is design. But in fact, all of those things are part of a design system. We make two fundamental mistakes in that way of thinking. First is that design is not constrained to the visual. In around the 1920s, Marcel Duchamp, who's an artist, said that he wanted to release art from what he called the tyranny of the eye. Because, art had been, up until that point, defined by what you could see. And he thought that shouldn't be the limit of art. He said everything should be art, I should be able to think about art in a more holistic way. And that was that was really, the early 20th century. That hasn't happened in design until now. We still kind of lose design by the visual, and so that constraint is really problematic. And some of the most important design is the invisible design that supports your way of life. And you think about urban zoning, for instance, or the design of the digital infrastructure that you take for granted. In global healthcare, it would include the regulation that governs the pricing and access to medications. That is a global design infrastructure that determines, the lives and deaths of people around the world, or the infrastructure of delivery that might be needed, that might need to be designed and developed. So if you're thinking about, how do we solve a problem, we might have the solution, but how do we get that solution in place on the ground in a particular location? So that takes us, much beyond the visual. And second, we need to design systems and ecologies, not objects. When we think of design discrete objects, we create more problems than we solve. We design what are called externalities, but in reality, in nature, there are no externalities. So when we think if you think about what we've done with the design brief, in the design brief, for the last 50 years, we've tried to make the brief as tight as possible. Like the ideal brief is one sentence. The perfect brief is a single word, pink. Like that's the kind of the kind of definitive brief. We've been working to go the other direction. We've been saying, no, the brief should be as comprehensive and complex as possible. We should write a manifesto for a brief. Brief should be a manifesto. It should be a comprehensive, ambitious vision of what we want to accomplish. That is as diverse and rich and comprehensive as possible in order to really understand the complex context of the problem. Because when we take the problem out of the context to solve it, we cut away all the implications. We then we create a problem that's a fake, discrete, singular object. We then wrap a singular solution to it. Then we put it back into context, and it causes all kinds of trouble, and we're absolutely shocked that there are problems. When it should be plainly evident that that's going to be the case. So what we have to realize is that we live a designed life. Our life is a designed experience that unfolds within our designed world. The quality of that design is our quality of life. So you no longer live within a natural world. You live in a designed world, and the kind of bounds of your life and the kind of the opportunities that exist in your life are within the design world that we've created. So your experience is a designed experience, and its kind of dynamic range is defined by the dynamic range of the world that we've defined. So that's, if you think about, I'll give you an example, your experience of nature. When you go to a national park, you're not really experiencing the natural world. You're experiencing a designed interface with the natural world. We've designed an interface with it so that you can have a safe, wonderful, beautiful experience of nature. You're not really experiencing the natural world. And, we've designed it so that it feels like you are, it seems like you are, but in fact, there's a kind of hidden infrastructure of park rangers, of maps and guides and campsites and, of kind of governance happening so that you can have a wonderful time with you and your family, your friends. But in fact, you're having a kind of designed experience of life. So understanding that we live a designed life is really critical to really understanding the nature of design and building the capacity to do it. So in that case, design is fundamental to life. I'm going to show you that we are all designers. So, even the people who are not designers on this call and in this room, I believe that the moment that you have intention, the moment that you say, I have a specific outcome in mind, and as soon as you say, I want a specific outcome, I'm not happy with random events. And so the world bifurcates. If you're happy with whatever happens by accident, you're not a designer. The moment you say, no, I want a specific outcome, you become a designer. Then the question is, how good a designer are you? How well can you envision your future? So how well can you articulate that vision? And how faithfully can you execute the vision? So that's really the kind of two questions that you have to answer. Are you good at articulating the vision? Are you good at executing the vision? So is a vision true to your intention? And is the execution true to your vision? And that's really the kind of process that we need to develop a methodology for imagining a vision that is an ecology and executing the realization of an ecology and designing an ecology. That's why I believe we ought to have a much more serious discussion about design. It should be happening as it is here in this room across all the disciplines. So the fact that, and it's why I'm so excited to be part of this, to bring design into this domain, because the fact is that mostly it's not been part of it. We have design in the design school, and then we have other schools, and design is, an accidental and maybe sometimes tangential practice. Whereas I think that the more that we can actually integrate it, the better off we're all going to be. At the most senior political and policy level, not only in design studios, businesses, and boardrooms, we've really put design in the kind of business world, and we've kept it out of a lot of the other disciplines. So design has really, what we saw in massive change was that design has changed scale in power and impact. So the image on the left is a kind of natural order of things that was and still is how most people see it. That design is a subset of business. That business is happens in a kind of cultural context, and a culture happens in the context of the natural world. But what we saw in massive change was that business, culture, and even nature have become design projects. That even the natural world is now our design project. And I remember when I first made this diagram, people said, Bruce, you're a crazy megalomaniac. Like, what you just want to control everything. And I said, it's not about control, it's about responsibility. Where we fail to design, we design for failure. In other words, if you look around the world, where we fail to design our presence in the ecologies that sustain us, we've destroyed them by sheer quantity. When we're 8 billion people, we crush things if we don't design them. So if we want ecologies to sustain us, we have to design them. And if we want to recover the ecologies that we've already destroyed, we have to design their recovery. And that's exactly what's happening. You see all over the world, we're redesigning the ecologies that we've destroyed and bringing them back. And I'll show you an example of my own hometown. So design now has a new set of responsibilities, and that presents serious questions and extraordinary opportunities. We have the greatest opportunities in human history that go along with the greatest challenges. I mean, we have the greatest challenges in the history of mankind. Your generation is stepping into a series of challenges the world has never experienced. And I'm going to touch on what some of those are. As James said, the back cover of the book that we did for Massive Change really said it best. It's not about the world of design, it's about the design of the world. It's about our capacity to shape the world. And that capacity is only growing. It's an exponential capacity. In other words, it is not growing at a linear rate. So we're experiencing a double exponential. And that is a doubling of humans. So a doubling of the quantity of humans and a doubling of capacity. So you get a double-double. Right? And that's really the defining concept of our age. That we have this kind of doubling of doubling that is it's why it's so hard to understand what's going on. It's so hard to keep pace with the new possibilities that are every day. It's not a linear growth; it's an exponential growth. And so when we did message change, we looked at what we call design economies, the regions of your life that are being transformed, and in some cases being invented by these new capacities. At all the different, these different kind of regions, we're completely reimagining them and changing fundamentally how we live and work. We started a school to do it. We invented the Institute Without Boundaries, purpose-driven, entrepreneurial, experience-based learning. And their project was Massive Change. So their project was a 20,000 square foot exhibition on the future of design. It opened in Vancouver, went to Toronto and Chicago. Each gallery was one of those economies. This is the image economy. It's like standing inside of a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum. So all the images in color you could see with the naked eye. Those images you could have seen, 10,000 years ago. All the images in black and white are all new because we've turned the entire spectrum into an eyeball. So we've taken all the other wavelengths of the spectrum and converted them to visible light. So we can use the whole spectrum as a human eyeball and look into the universe to make better decisions. We looked at the market economy. The market is not a natural space; it's a design space, and we look at all the people and groups who are reinventing the market in order to make new things possible. We looked at the energy economy and how the kind of wealth of solar is like that map on the wall is a map of the wealth of solar, where the richest places in the world are, which is a kind of inversion of previous wealth. How new concepts change everything. How waste equals food. How an output of waste becomes an input of food in the new way of thinking. And how in the design of life, we now have a capacity to design evolution, that we will actually be responsible for the direction of the future of life. And we showed how, we are in the process of doing this. And that part of the exhibit, that gallery, was designed as a series of voting booths. It was designed so that people had to vote about whether or not we should be doing it. And we made it as difficult as possible to vote one way or the other. So if you voted for it, you understood the risks that you were embracing. And if you voted against it, you understood the opportunities that you were denying. We tried to make it as difficult as possible to decide. So for instance, in this gallery, you see on the right-hand side, those are two salmon. The small one is a natural salmon. And the big one is a Canadian government salmon, designed by the Canadian government, that grows about 6 times the size at like 5 times the speed. So you have this huge salmon production, which, at first glance, you think, I don't want that. And it was clear that actually in this gallery, it was the sentient beings where people kind of didn't want to cross that threshold. They were happy to redesign things that weren't, in their mind, sentient. So the chicken and the salmon, it was too much. But when we talked to the people responsible for the UN food program that were feeding hundreds of millions of people every day, they had a different perspective on it. So it was a very interesting conversation. Now, that whole project was based on this quotation by British historian Arnold Toynbee, who said that the 20th century will mostly be remembered not for violence and conflict or for technical invention, not for innovation or for violence. And this was in 1957 that he said this. And Toynbee wrote a 20-volume history of the world, so he really was an expert in this. So in 1957, he would have lived through the worst killing in human history, 70 million people killed. And he says, no, that's actually not the big story. He would have seen the explosion of innovation that the Second World War produced, and he said, no, it's not, the computer. I mean, think about, the atomic bomb. I mean, think about the technology that it produced. No, that's not the big story. He said, no, the big story is that we dared to think of the welfare of the whole human race as a practical objective. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that's the biggest idea I've ever heard. I mean, that's the most amazing. I mean, that's what I think, that's why I'm a designer. I think most designers do it for that reason. I don't think they would say it in that grand way. I don't think most designers, I wouldn't frame my life that way, but it's absolutely true to what I was hoping to do. And so, I said, I think this is it. But when I talked to my friends about it, they said, Bruce, don't do it. It's a disaster. We should have done that, but we didn't. And you're going to see, he's all wrong. And I said, I really don't think so. I think, my research shows that he's absolutely right. We did do that. And so we did the show. We did the research, 20-person years of research. He was so right. Like, it was really radically, it was really troubling that we don't believe it, that somehow we don't think that that's what we actually do. And so it really was a kind of fascinating project for me. So we did the show. It opened in Vancouver. I went to a high school and I did a presentation. I shared some of that images I just shared with you. And after the presentation, a young woman came to the microphone and she said, Mr. Mao, I think you're not thinking big enough. And I said, can you tell me more, because nobody is saying that right now. It's quite the opposite. People are telling me that I'm a megalomaniac. And she said, well, Toynbee was right about the 20th century, but our project for the 21st century, take out the 20th and put in the 21st, and take out the welfare of the whole human race and put in all of life. That's our project. And when she said that, I was just blown away, because that's exactly what we need to do. And I realized we had such a blind spot that we were thinking about it from Toynbee's perspective, from back then, from the 50s. But now it's actually from a different perspective, and it needs to be brought up to date. And so that began our journey to what we now think of as life-centered design, to really understand that actually we need to think about all of life as our project. And for several years, I've been on the board of the McEwen Architecture School in Sudbury, Northern Ontario. And it's a tricultural project between French, English, and Indigenous leaders. And one of the things that they do, this is one of the projects they do, they go into the forest with an Indigenous elder, and they make a canoe the way that it's been done for thousands of years. And the beauty of that canoe is that once they finish that canoe and they launch it and they have their experience, if that canoe gets broken or wears out or it's just no longer useful, they simply can bring it back to the forest floor and leave it there, and it becomes food for the next generation of life. It has a perfectly cyclical life. It never creates a problem. And it's one of the most beautiful objects you've ever seen, and it's incredibly useful. Like, it has a beauty in utility, a beauty visually and formally, and a beauty in its cyclical nature and its material quality. And the way that they seal, when they have when they put the birch bark together to make the final thing, there are, inevitably holes in the birch bark, and they seal it with a material made of bear fat, spruce gum, and ash from the fire. And so they mix up this material that they've been making for thousands of years, and that material will survive -40 winters and 100-degree summers, and not crack or it's like a kind of material innovation that is absolutely fantastic. And all of that is perfectly attuned to a natural cycle of life. And that, for me, is what life-centered design is really about. And we had an extraordinary experience with, around the same time, we had an extraordinary experience with E.O. Wilson, who's probably the greatest life scientist of the last 50 years. We're working with Frank Gehry on a new Museum of Biodiversity in Panama City, in Panama, and at the entrance to the Panama Canal. And we asked Wilson to come and work with us, and we went into the jungle together. And he explained there's only one thing on the planet, and that's life. And life has an experiment going in form, and we're one of those forms. Nothing more. We don't have a special hall pass. We don't own nature. We're not above it. We don't have dominion over it. And he said this thing that really stuck with me. He said, rock is slow life, and life is fast rock. And that, essentially you are matter, you're rock that is animated with electricity. And when that electricity gets turned off, you go back to rock. And, over time, you're going to get pushed back into the earth, and you're going to get crushed back to rock, over the kind of long, geological time. And so, when we listen to our indigenous leaders, they say, we think we're related to the rocks and the grasses. And our life scientist says rock is slow life and life is fast rock. And so here you have the kind of the indigenous leaders and the best life scientists telling us the same thing, that life and the kind of that we are the earth, that we are life, and that there is no separation between the life on the planet and us, and that our mythology, our kind of false story that somehow we own it, is really a kind of story that is helping us damage it, and giving us permission to do the worst possible things. And so that really takes us to life-centered design. Really a completely different. It's not human-centered. Right? It's not about us. It's about all of life. When we put all of life, not humans, at the center, designing ecologies, not objects, we can begin to solve our problems in context and incorporate the ecosystems that sustain us. We can begin to repair the damage that we've done and accelerate positive change. So let's take a moment to look at context. We're now 7.9 billion. And you can see that the red line is the more developed world, the blue line is less developed. You can see where the growth is. And you can see that it's not slowing down tremendously. Right? It's slowing down in the developed world. It's actually even beginning to decrease. But in the less developed, it's still, radically, we're going to be somewhere around 10 billion by 2050. So that's an additional, somewhere around 3 or 4 more billion people. We're going to lose a couple, so we'll end up adding 2. Now, at first glance, you think that's the worst news I've heard today. But it's also great news, because we'll have 4 billion people, maybe 5 billion people, who don't know the stupid old ways. It's an opportunity a historical opportunity to do something new that we don't have to unlearn. We're going to have billions of people who we can just start fresh. And we have this kind of incredible opportunity. I like to say that we have success problems, not failure problems. The red line here is population from 1750 to today. You can see that all the other lines are resource implications. And you can see that we weren't nicer, kinder people back then. We were just fewer. And all the problems run with quantity. And so we're quantity now. I mean, that's the real problem that we have is quantity. The good news is we won't solve the problems of the future with the tools of the past. This is a work of Ray Kurzweil. He shows that around 2025, we'll put the power of a human brain into your pocket for $1,000. So you'll have a device that has the processing power of a brain for about $1,000, and by around 2050, it will have the power of all human brains. So imagine how different it will be to engage problems, to think about things, to explore possibilities, when you have the processing power of all human brains in your pocket for the price of an iPhone. The bad news is that we have very little time to make the kind of changes that we need. Less than 10 years now to avoid global disaster, and now on top of that we have this, and on top of that we have this, and on top of that we have this, and it just keeps coming. And all the while we're doing this. These days we pull out about a cubic mile of oil. So that's like if you imagine every year we pull out a cubic mile of oil and set it on fire. And then we imagine that that's not going to affect our ecology. So we're still doing this. Those numbers aren't going down, they're going up. Coal is going up. Oil is going up. Gas is going up. The carbon-based energy forms are going up and not down. So we're still, things are getting worse, not better, while we're trying to solve these problems. So it's what I call the crisis stack, which is that you have a whole new kind of a new condition. It's not the old way. You've got a set of problems that are stacked on top of one another, happening simultaneously. You have climate, pandemic, racial justice, food insecurity, democracy, all happening simultaneously, and more and more. I mean, that's not the complete list. So we no longer have the luxury to manage one crisis at a time. In the past, we could really kind of, they kind of came in a time frame that we could actually collect ourselves. But now everything is really connected. Technology is permeating every aspect of society. Waves of innovation are coming faster and faster. That exponential, the double that I mentioned. Boundaries are blurring, so that kind of, where one begins and one ends is harder to define. Bigger problems need bigger teams with more expertise. You need more and more ability to actually do what's happening here today. We need to augment our thinking and work at the nexus of art, technology, and science, and that's what the nexus is about. And so I'll be sharing more of that in the next session. It's a book that we just released with Julio Tino, is the Dean of Engineering at Northwestern, where I'm a fellow. And it's really about the kind of convergence of art, technology, and science. If you think about what happens where those worlds converge, it's design. Design is our daily practice where those worlds come together. But if you think about where we find ourselves, practically everything we do today needs to change. Like almost nothing works for the future. I mean, almost nothing we do is actually built for the future. We're still doing most things as if we own nature and have unlimited resources. We work as if waste is not a problem. For most people, we can't even conceive of a waste-free world. We just think waste is, like, we don't think that we invented it. We think waste is nature, but it's not. It's actually human. We treat nature like a pantry and a toilet. Right? So we eat everything it produces, but we also dump everything that we have into it. We think short-term, party like there's no tomorrow, and pass a check to you guys. So, sorry. We dump problems we can't solve into places we can't see. As I said, out of sight, out of mind is the operating system. And many of our solutions create more problems than they correct. That concept of discrete, that discrete object problem is the problem that creates more problems than they correct. So things got to change, and that's really what we need. And that's why we're doing massive action. That's what we're committed to. We don't have the luxury of cynicism. Unlike everyone else, we are allergic to cynicism. We can't afford it. We can't allow it. It's not it's not part of our lexicon. So how do we get to a better future? How do we practice life-centered design? That's what MC24 is about. These are the 24 principles. They are outlined in the book. I'm going to just touch on 2 of them today. The first is first inspire. It's the first for a reason. As design leaders, we take responsibility for inspiration. So, many people in design, they think of inspiration as a kind of special sauce that happens only to certain kinds of people. That you have to be a certain kind of person to be inspirational. And it's just not the case. Inspiration is a job. It's a job like any other. We don't leave it to chance. We take it as a kind of principal responsibility. And in our work, we make it our first priority and our first responsibility, and that's what we do for a living. And that, because it is our, it defines our way of working, it's the engine of change, it's the only way we can actually make change. We don't have authority. We don't have the ability to force change. I can't make, even when I see the solution perfectly, even when I know exactly what we have to do, I can't make my clients do it. I can have it exactly, and I can know exactly what to do. I can't make them do it. I have to show it to them in a way that inspires them. I have to show them a pathway and show them that destination. I have to give them the vision in a way that inspires them to go on that journey and go to that new place, because it's so much better than where they are now. And I've got to make that happen. And so that's our responsibility, and it's also true for them. We assign a kind of magical power to CEOs, but the same is true for them. CEOs can't make their employees do anything. They can't make their employees change and do something. We think they can, but they can't. They have to inspire them. The only real way they can do it is to inspire them. And that's really how we approach the work. And we help them to do that. Now, the great news is that we all have the power to inspire. We have to be open to possibility. So we actually have to we have to open our mind to the possibility of doing something extraordinary and doing something that really changes things. Declare purpose and ideals. We have to declare something that really makes a difference, that really has an impact. And then we have to measure against the purpose and ideals. In other words, we have to kind of make that vision, and we have to use it as a yardstick. We have to use it as a metric to say we are moving that direction. And we're going to measure it every day of the year. We did a project with Arizona State University, and we developed, they developed really 200 metrics to know whether or not they were accomplishing it. So they had 200 metrics for whether the university was achieving the vision that we had set out. And in those 200 metrics, you could tell, every day whether or not we were moving the university in the right direction. And when we started, they were the #1 party school in America. We were mandated to raise $1 billion for them. We raised $10 billion, and they've been the #1 school for innovation for the last 7 years, beating MIT and Stanford, which are have been for decades the top two tools for innovation. So those metrics for vision are absolutely critical in the work. So that's the first principle. The second is begin with fact-based optimism. Is that all clear? Okay. Sometimes I get more strident than I ought to be.
Be strident. Stride on.
As designers taking on the great challenges we face today, we have no choice but to be optimistic. Even though our media is structurally organized around violence and conflict, the real story of our time is living together and caring for one another. We cannot afford the luxury of cynicism. So this for me is one of the most important mindset principles. When you watch the media, it's important to understand they're not bad people. It's not that they're like intentionally setting out to tell you a story that isn't true. But they are structurally organized, they're structurally designed around violence and conflict. The pattern that works in their model is violence and conflict. This doesn't work. We're not going to show up on the news tonight because we're collaborating, we're in a good spirit, we're meeting together to improve the world, we're hopeful, there's no one's going to get injured, I hope. There's not going to be any violence and bloodshed. But this meeting is happening right now, thousands of places around the world, across languages, cultures, national borders, across all kinds of boundaries and barriers. This is the real story of our time. Collaboration, cooperation, innovation, people working together to solve problems that in some cases have vexed us since the beginning of time. And so this is what we are doing, and it's really critical as designers that our job is to bring the optimism. We are not, we cannot afford the luxury of cynicism. It's a luxury for someone else. In fact, more people are wealthier, healthier, and living longer, traveling, connecting, and learning from other cultures across boundaries and borders, languages and religions, and experiencing the beauties and pleasures of the diversity of our world than at any time in human history. And not by a slight margin, by a radical long shot. This is the best time in human history to be alive. Like, for more people in more places than at any time ever. Now, it's not for everyone. It's not that there isn't suffering. It's not that there isn't terrible things happening. It's not that there aren't, that there isn't mendacity, stupidity, greed, violence, like the worst behavior. But nonetheless, this is still the case. And we've created this situation by optimism and design, by successfully applying design methods to problems like hunger and disease, poverty and ignorance. To continue this development, it is critical to understand our place in history and embrace the optimistic outlook that got us here. It's really important that we don't forget how we won. Like James and I were talking about today about how easy it is for humans to forget that we won and how we won. In my neighborhood in Chicago, there's a beautiful school designed by the Saarinen and the Eameses. It's on a historic landmark place. It's a brilliant little school. Every classroom is an L-shaped. It has an indoor-outdoor classroom. The students can kind of learn outside. It's beautiful. It's simple, it's inexpensive, it's beautiful, and I would hazard a guess that almost no school that has been built in the last 10 years is as good as that school, and it was done 50 years ago. I mean, more than that, probably 70 years ago now. And we've forgotten all the lessons, we've forgotten all the victories that we won in doing that. And we are kind of going backwards somehow. And so it's really critical to understand our victories and to collate them and to remember them and to use them to keep going. This is a project by a guy named Max Roser called Our World in Data. And it's one of my favorite things. He's an absolutely brilliant guy. And this is 6 of the most important metrics of the last 200 years. And you can see basically what he's done is he's represented the world as 100 people. Right? These are 6 really important metrics. Extreme poverty, basic education, literacy, democracy, vaccination, and child mortality. And you can see that in every case, there has been a positive inversion. In other words, in extreme poverty, in 1820, 200 years ago, only 6 out of 100 were not living in extreme poverty. So, I mean, it's hard to get your head around it because we have an extraordinary ability to project our current circumstances forwards and backwards. And so we imagine somehow that we're always going to kind of live like this, and we've always lived like this. And, well, actually, no. We haven't always lived like this, and we won't always live like this. We could live much worse, and we certainly did live much worse. And we could live much better if we design it in the right way. And so what he shows is that 200 years ago, only 6 were living in extreme we're not living in extreme poverty. So that 94 out of 100 people on Earth were living in extreme poverty 200 years ago. And today, only 10 out of 100 are still there. Now, it's still, you have to, when I say only 10, it's still a huge number, but look at where that line is going. Right? What I find really compelling is how smooth the lines are. Now, there's going to be a bump in that line with the pandemic, and there are going to be bumps in the lines when you have a movement of right-wing, who would try to set it back. But you can see that, child mortality, it is moving to 0. Right? Like 200 years ago, 43 out of 100 kids died before 5 years old. So roughly half your children die. I mean, think about what that world looks like. I mean, it's just a totally different world than that we're in now. Right? And you can see that the same is true in literacy, basic education, vaccination, of course. I mean, think about how extraordinary that graph is, and what the possibilities are. So we have to constantly be vigilant about what's really going on. And I want to show you an example from my hometown. This is Jane Goodall and the Prime Minister planting the 10 millionth tree in my hometown. I grew up in Sudbury, and in Sudbury there was a mining and smelting operation that was so toxic it killed everything for 30 miles, and I mean everything. So when the astronauts from NASA wanted to train the astronauts for what they would find on the moon, they sent them to my hometown because it was the closest thing on Earth to the surface of the moon. This is what the scientists who did the project of regreening this place did this chart for me. It's called Massive Change During Bruce Snell's Lifetime. And what it shows is the emissions from the mining and smelting operation. So I was born in '59, right? And that year, the smelting emissions was over 2,500 kilotons of sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide basically kills everything, and it turns everything black. So what happens is that, a rock exposed, rock sitting in the landscape, exposed to sulfur dioxide, gets entirely covered in matte black. Like it almost disappears in blackness. If you pick it up, it's pink quartz underneath, but it's flat, matte black on top, and it kills everything in the landscape. So literally not a blade of grass grew for a 30-mile radius. These two guys, John Gunn and David Pearson, set about a project to figure out how to recover the ecology. And over the course of about, they started in 78, right? The regreening program started, and Dr. Jane Goodall plants the 10 millionth tree a couple of months ago. And they figure that now there's about 100 million trees. So they figured out how to recover the soil. They did huge numbers of transplants of kind of like hair plugs of the forest. They would go in the forest and cut out a patch of the forest, pick it up and drop it into almost like a skin graft of the forest floor. So it would take all the species of the forest floor and bring them into this new place. And it's been wildly successful. Now that means that they've actually been able to not only preserve the wild, but to design and expand the wild. And that's really what we need to do. Like, we have to not only preserve the wild that remains, but actually design and produce more. And that's really the project. And so this is the project that we're working on now, Massive Action. And it has these kind of three dimensions, which is life, to protect, expand, and design the wild of life. Redesign everything in keeping with the living world. So, basically everything else we do needs to be designed in a way that is sympathetic with the natural world. And finally, empower people with design. We want to produce 100 million designers who have the capacity to think in this new way. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic, Bruce. Thank you so much. I just encourage anyone who has any thoughts or comments or questions or issues that they'd like to raise, please do so. Don't hesitate. We've got lots of time for discussion. So please go ahead.
Oh, sure. First of all, amazing talk. You had me thinking about how a lot of the systems that we design relating to like nature or are actually us redesigning what people from the past have done to it. For example, in the case of like your hometown, we're really redesigning what the damage that was already done by someone else who designed a different system.
Yeah.
So if you look at like a new problem, like deforestation or something, there will be people who say, like, we need the lumber for this and this, and somebody's solution might be, replant any trees that you cut down, but somebody else might say, let's just stay out of the area entirely. When you have people who are designing different solutions for a problem, how do you decide which solution is right, or how should people, come to an agreement about that?
Yes. There isn't a singular answer to that. What we're going to need to do is, the reality of those kinds of decisions is that they've been mostly in the hands of owners and out of the hands of citizens, communities, indigenous people, people generally. They've been concentrated almost exclusively in the hands of owners. and we need to actually put those back into a discursive community conversation. Like, we need to actually collectively understand what we're doing, because you know, for a long time we could get away with that. You know, like when you're a billion people, you can kind of, you know, you can behave like frat boys, and it really doesn't matter. But when you're 8 billion going to 10 billion, the damage can be really significant, and it can be irreparable. You know, we can destroy, and we are destroying things that will never come back. You know, we're eliminating species that once they're gone, we're not gonna get them again. And so these kinds of decisions need to be, you know, we need to actually design governance as much as we design processes and projects and products. So it's a great question, and the answer is a really complex engagement with those questions.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Sam. Oh.
No, go ahead, Sam.
I think my favorite part of your talk was when you said we have no choice but to be optimistic.
Huh?
I think that is just like beautifully succinct, and I 100% agree. But as a youth of this difficult time that we're going through right now, I think it's a lot easier said than done, and a lot of the time, like, I feel very overwhelmed with all of the different pressures that are happening within our world. So that being said, you feel narcissistic, or you feel that you're slipping, like, what are some things that you can do to kind of ground yourself and bring yourself back? And in other words, is there like a way to design a system that allows you to be more optimistic?
That's great. That's a wonderful question. You know, when we did Massive Change, we met a couple hundred of the world's great innovators, and, you know, people taking on some of the most vexing challenges in history. And it was like a mainline injection of optimism. Like, if you ever wanted to kind of, if you want that kind of exposure, you know, to some degree it's in that book. But it's also like, you know, if you get that book, you can kind of call any one of those people. You know, like, I mean, they're all online, they're all doing projects, you know, they're all kind of working still. I mean, not all, but almost all. So they're out there, and I think what you're onto is a really important issue, and it's one of the things that we're working on, which is we need a media vehicle, channel, or we need some kind of communication vehicle that is constantly reinforcing the positive movement. Because, I mean, it's like we need a kind of collective shrink for this generation. Because, you know, we met this, you know, one of the people we met in our work with Massive Change was this guy, Stuart Brand. Stuart Brand was, he was one of the people who helped found Media Lab at MIT, and he did the Whole Earth Catalog, and he's just an incredible guy. And he said, when people think that things are bad and getting worse, they do what makes sense, which is they behave selfishly. They hoard, they lock their doors, they close the border, they do the things that make sense, right? Like, actually, if you're in a crisis, it makes sense to close the border. It's not nice, but it does make sense. And he said, on the contrary, when people see that we're investing in the future, they want to be part of it. Right? And so that's why it's so important to see what we're doing. right? Because the vast majority of what we're doing is positive. Very, very tiny, like super slim margin is violence and conflict. It's terrible. Like I once said to my wife, if you published a newspaper called Reality, it would be a mile thick. And the first quarter inch is the New York Times, and it scares the living daylights out of you. The rest of the mile is massive change. It's people collaborating. It's people cooperating and doing things and solving problems, and it's positive. And so, but we don't see it, and so we're convinced that it's not happening, and we're convinced that the nightly news is reality. And so we really need ways of turning that off and turning on another channel. And there's a lot of people actually working on that problem. But I think you're on to. It's a great problem. I mean, it's a great question.
Please go ahead.
When you talk about we should be moving the decision-making process into the power of the people as part of the designing for ecology, I think design essentially operates at the political or policy-making level. So what do you think about designers on the political policy-making level, and how do you think we can get there?
Well, I think that we should be, we have to train people to do that. And that's by kind of imagining and defining design in that way, in the way that we are now. And also by taking people who are already there and giving them design tools. It's one of the reasons that we're doing Massive Action, to basically give people design, giving people design tools who are already policy people. Like we're working with all kinds of groups to give them, design models to be able to kind of think like this. But it's important that we define design outside of strictly aesthetics, and especially for me, one of the things that I find very weird, and I know that it's not weird in the world, it's just weird in my mind, is that I don't make a distinction between writing and designing. Like I think writing is designing, and I think designing is writing, and I think it's all part of a way of engaging, and it's kind of using all of our tools to engage people and kind of how do we get the best possible results? How do we engage people in the deepest way, in the most exciting way? How do we inspire them? All those questions for me, they're open questions that I don't want to start from a boundary. Right? So, it's not accidental that the school that we created was the Institute Without Boundaries. I didn't want to start from the disciplines, because I wanted to say, let's start from the problems and think about the problems and what we need to, let's go after the problems and get whatever we need to solve the problem. And if we do it that way, we'll learn to move through these new terrains in an entrepreneurial way. And that's what design really offers us. Design is an entrepreneurial method. When you think about what a designer does, designer looks around the room and looks for opportunity and advantage. That's what an entrepreneur does. So when an entrepreneur has an opportunity, they look around the room and they think, how can I advance this business? How can I advance my cause? And what can I use? Is there someone in this room that can help me? Like, how can I move forward? And for me, that's a design sensibility. And so I want to develop that model, that entrepreneurial model that isn't constrained by the disciplines. Because I think that, the disciplines are good for the job market, but they're not so useful for the problem market. And I want to really address the problem market. Because that's where the opportunities are. It's where the challenges are. Like, the challenges don't fit the categories of the disciplines anymore. Like, we don't have a graphic design problem. we have a ecology problem. And I haven't seen an ecology designer yet. So I need to create new kinds of people. And that means you need new thinkers. And we don't want them bound to the classical disciplines. And that's what we did at ASU. The concept at ASU was we had all these classical domains of knowledge, but they weren't relevant to the problems in the world. So we had a department of astronomy, but astronomy is really fascinating to a very, very small number of people. Like, to a true astronomer, it's awesome. I don't deny that. I don't want to say to the astronomers, you're not interesting. On the contrary, I love that. But when you say we have a department of space travel, that's really compelling to a lot of people. And once you decide you want to go to space, you're going to push the old astronomers off their stuff and push them out of the way to get their stuff, because your life depends on knowing that stuff. And you will live or die if you know astronomy when you go to space. So you're going to learn astronomy better than they will. And so that idea of actually driving it with purpose, really using purpose as the entrepreneurial driver of learning, and connecting it with challenges, and using the challenges as the engine, was, we raised, $10 billion with that idea, and it completely changed the university. When we started, they were 65,000 people, and this fall they were 180,000. So it's been a revolution.
I wonder, Bruce, if just answering another way of thinking about that question and get your reflection on this. It's a great question. If you think about your life and how you thus far have lived it, you started with a very clear intention as you fell into the world of design. And then you pursued that. You pursued it with very particular opportunities. Not all of them worked. You know that. Not everything is a success. But there are some successes. And those, and actually some pretty massive successes. And those successes create opportunity for you and for others. Right? So to answer your question about, the idea that somehow, and I'd love to get you to comment on this, Bruce. The idea that somehow design is not part of policy and governance and so on, it absolutely must be. And the way to do that is to pursue opportunity. So we have, just here, for example, we've got 4 case studies, right? We've got 4 things that we're going to be doing, right? Those are opportunities. So bring your design sensibility to that project, right? Learn in that project, right? Now, not all of them are going to be successful. I don't want to presage disaster, but not all of them are going to be successful in the way that we originally conceived them. But that will create future opportunities for each person who participates. The existing scientists who are part of those projects will learn from the designers. The designers will learn from the scientists. And in pursuing over time, you actually participate in the construction of a policy process. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Bruce.
No, you're absolutely right. For me, it's been very. Let me start by saying that I have virtually no education. So I went to college for 18 months. So, and I've been trying to compensate for that ever since. So I worked my ass off as a consequence. But you're absolutely right that it's a kind of incremental, it's a kind of sedimentary kind of process of exploration, and I have been very fortunate. I consider myself one of the most fortunate designers of the last half century. That I was very deliberate in putting out a very specific signal about what I was trying to do. Right? So what I wanted to do, what I was interested in, and I put out a very specific signal on that, and was fortunate in finding people who wanted to do those things. So that kind of like finding the right people who wanted to do what I wanted to do was, I started a company. My first company was called Public Good, and it was a very simple. It wasn't a very heavy political idea, but it was a very simple idea that I just wanted, I worked really hard. I wanted that work to go to things that I thought made the world a better place, to improve the world. And so that was part of putting out that signal to say, if you also want to improve the world, come and talk to us. We want to do that. And we work hard, and we're creative, and we'll help you. And so that it was a kind of, and we weren't very sophisticated about it. We just wanted to, and we worked with nurses, and we worked with the Ontario Nurses Association, and it was a great experience. And it set the tone for all the work. I still basically do, like if you said, what's the kind of underlying ambition, it's still public good, it's still the same after 40 years. And so, but it is complex. And one of the questions, could you please elaborate on how you navigate the extractive model of capitalism? It's a really tough, it's a complex equation of negotiating the opportunities to best direct the power of the market to produce public good. And one of the things that we saw when we did massive change, what we discovered that was really interesting was that that when we look across the conventional political spectrum of left to right, being of the left, I would have thought that's where I would be, that I should find all of my people there. But I was finding very interesting people on the right, people really using the market and market mechanisms to advance the world. People like Dean Kamen. And then I saw people on the left who I thought were really uninteresting, doing things that were not forward thinking. What I realized was that actually there was a different political axis developing that was really 90 degrees to that classical left and right. That was about kind of forward and backward. And we saw people across the spectrum using social institutions and market mechanisms to advance the world, and to get more, a better world to more people. If you take someone like the Eames Studio, their motto was the best to the most for the least. Right? They were a market-driven enterprise. They worked for Herman Miller, IBM. They worked for companies that made things and sold them. but they use that opportunity to improve the world and to drive the world forward. And they really work across that spectrum. And so that, I think, is really how we work. Like I work across that spectrum, and I am entrepreneurial across the spectrum. So I will work with Coca-Cola if we can drive the world forward over there. And I will work with cultural institutions, with schools, with universities, I'll work with anybody across the spectrum if together we can move the world forward.
Great answer. So we have a couple of questions online, and just a few minutes left. So I'll just ask the questioners to be relatively brief. And Isaac Weldon has had his hand up there for a while, so please go ahead, Isaac.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Bruce, for sharing your wonderful ideas. I'll keep my question really brief, and I just wanted to ask your thoughts on. Well, first, let me say I completely agree that simplifying and abstracting can only get us so far, and it tends to create more problems than it does good. And complexifying probably represents the most powerful way to find efficient and effective solutions to many of the problems of today. But one fear that I have in embarking on this research is it seems to me that incremental change is hard enough to inspire. So is it realistic or feasible to think that instead of focusing on one small problem, focusing on all these big problems all at once is more feasible or realistic? Or maybe counterintuitively, it is more realistic because it offers a greater chance of success?
That's a great question. I don't know with certainty what the answer is, but I do know that, for instance, we were just in Australia working with the University of New South Wales and on massive action, and we proposed to produce 100 million designers, and frankly, I said it, let's say that not exactly in jest, but I said it as a kind of provocation. That's a kind of right way of putting it. But it had an effect that was really exciting, because it is outside of what we know how to do. So it inspires, it inspires the mind, it inspires the creative juice. We don't know how to achieve that. We do know that we can't do it the conventional way. Like, we can't get 100 million designers to York University. That's not going to happen. Right? So how do we do it? And that means we have to innovate it. And the moment that, once you get to that threshold, it actually gets pretty practical. It strangely becomes a kind of thing that we can do. It's like, okay, yeah. And so we started already to kind of say, okay, if you have to do that, how do you break it down in numbers? Where are they? Where's the 100 million of us? Right? Where are the 100 million new designers? And how do we, if we're going to make them a designer, what do we have to do? So for instance, we found this extraordinary person in India. She's got a program called Design for Change. She has a very simple diagram of what it takes. It's for kids, right? She's already in 62 countries. She started this thing. She wants to go to 1 billion kids. And it's I thought, wow, I'm behind already. I only got 100 million. And so you realize that actually, that sometimes the audaciousness is actually what you need to kind of kickstart the mechanism. Now, we may never get to 100 million, but I think there's a good chance we will, and we won't get there if we said 1,000. And so it's exciting to kind of think about it, to kind of explore that way of thinking. And I'm pretty certain that we'll do 100 million, actually. Right? Like, you know, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I'm pretty sure that we will.
Dermot Brown, would you like to go ahead?
Hey, Dermot.
Hey, hello Bruce, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yep.
I love what you're doing, Bruce, and I have a short question for you. I'm quite interested in, even though I'm an artist, I'm quite interested in this organizational development and leadership change that's going on around the world. But I see the business world running to try and understand creativity, and there's no escaping this creative moment where you're in front of a problem, and it's like being in front of a canvas, and you just don't know what to do for that moment. How do you get people past that gap into the entrepreneurial or creative mindset?
We have methods for doing that. One of the principles is sketch. Hey, everybody, let's fail. And we have a kind of methodology that we work with for people to do that. I mean, one of the challenges in our culture is that it's all about success. I mean, we're trained for success. Everything is about success. And we have almost no cultural mechanisms about failure. And so when you're born, you know how to draw, and we teach you that you don't. And it's a terrible thing. And so, we have 3 daughters, and, one of them came home and said, my teacher told me that I don't draw right. And that was the end of that conversation, let me tell you. But that's really how we approach it. We beat it out of them. And we need people need to find a comfort level again with their own ability to fail and be okay. And that's hard to do in a culture where everything's about succeeding. Right? And so you have to kind of build models and mechanisms into the culture to let them do that. And sketching is a perfect version of that. It's interesting because sports is actually, I did a lot of work with Ken Dryden, who at the time was the president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he was my hero when I was a kid. He was the goalie for the Montreal Canadiens. And he won 5 consecutive Stanley Cups. I mean, he was like phenomenal. And a lot of our conversation was about how sport is like design, it's like art. That if you think about sport, you're almost always failing, right? Like a great baseball player is failing 2/3 of the time. like 2/3 of the time they're striking out. That's a superstar player, right? And so most of the time, like if you think about hockey, almost every time you go up the ice, you fail. So you're practicing that failing constantly. So we need to have that kind of a culture in design. Like we need that kind of ability to try and try and try, and not know that it's okay to fail. And the example that we use in that regard is Frank Gehry, because Frank is maybe the best architect in the world, and he does more models than anyone that I know. And if you think, well, if Frank is the best there is, why does he have to do more sketches and models and not less? Like, you think if he's so damn good, why doesn't he just do the thing? Like, get right to it, do the thing. But he does more models, not less. He does more block models, more sketches, more final, more and more closer and closer to final models. And the reason is that he is better than other architects because he does more experimentation and more trial and error. He throws more away. And that's what we have to build into the way that we work. So that's that kind of failure model. So we need to find a culture of getting comfortable with that kind of throwing away. Hard to do.
So, and our last question, Rupsha Mutsudi, would you mind please going ahead?
Yeah, I will try to keep my questions succinct, but I will admit it is kind of a loaded question. I was wondering, how you sort of plan for sort of the variables that we can't see. Like a popular colloquialism is that, we're training for jobs that don't exist, right? So I was wondering if you had any insight about how we can keep the design process flexible enough for those like future shocks that may come up. The future is not exactly like a static entity, it's always changing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do have one of the principles is design the platform for constant design. And that is, it really comes from having the super weird experience of redesigning things that you designed. Like normally you're designing something that someone else designed. So we get a call to design the brand of a company or the brand of an institution that someone else designed, 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And the unstated kind of thought in the room is the last people weren't that smart. We're much smarter than them. This time we're going to get it right. But when it's your own work that you're redesigning, you really can't say that because you're saying, it's like, hey, wait a second, that's me. So I've had that experience a few times of redesigning my own work. And so you realize, wait a second, we need to design it so that it can be redesigned. You need to design a kind of changing model. You need a design that actually has dimensions that stay stable and dimensions that can be variable. And yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, we designed the Netherlands Architecture Institute brand identity. It was the first one that we really did this way. And we gave them 100 logos and 1,000 colors. And it was all based on a single logo graphic, but it was projected onto 100 different surfaces. And then we photographed those 100 different surfaces and gave them 100 photos. So it was all based on a single image, but it had 100 different variations. And that has lasted, I think, now 20 years or something. Like, it's lasted a long time because it's built into it a kind of variability. But I think probably the most kind of extreme example was the work that we did for Mecca, because Mecca asked us to design, to do a plan for Mecca, a 10-year plan for Mecca. And we said, it's Mecca. If we do a 10-year plan, we're going to base it on the car. If we do a 1,000-year plan, we can't possibly know what the technologies are. So we'll have to design an open platform. So we'll have to design an open system that can accommodate new technologies. And that's the best thing we can do. Right? So that we can't know what those technologies are going to be, but we can design an open system that would allow for changing technologies. And so you can actually conceptualize an open system without knowing, what those things are going to become. Now, it's not, you can't be absolutely certain that that will accommodate it, but it gives you, I think, the best way to kind of think about how that works.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Let me just take a minute or two and just thank Bruce. Bruce, you've given us just a fantastic opening to the seminar series and to your fellowship here at the Institute. So Bruce is a fellow now, a community fellow here at the Institute for the next year, and his wife, BC Williams. They're sort of partners in crime and design. But today you've given us really just a wonderful set of ideas and invitations to a new way of thinking. And you've really described for us an approach that brings us out of a toxic brew of impossibility, because there is no possibility of a meaningful future using the same strategies that we have used for the last 500 years. And you've really given us a way of seeing that is truly life-centered in its approach. And your principles around life-centered design, the 24 that are outlined in the book, but the two that you chose to inspire and to adopt a fact-based optimism, I think these are really these really are very powerful and the most important of starting points for thinking about a world of possibility. And you've really given us not just a language, but an experience, a change of mind. It's almost like a phase effect shift in how to think about where we are now and where we want to be. So I really want to thank you for that. And I also think that the three core concepts that you kind of arrived at the end of your discussion, this idea of designing, making massive action about life, designing for life, to protect, to expand, and to design the wild and the ecology, redesigning everything so that it is in keeping with life, or in keeping with the living world, and then finally empowering design into virtually everything that we do. These are really, really powerful starting points. So I really want to thank you for that, and most especially for just showing through example that intention actually matters, right? That when you start with a particular intention, which you did, some 40 years ago, you have been able to describe in successive kind of iterations a vision, and then also to execute that vision based on your intention, and that has been a consistent kind of mantra almost, or way of doing for what you have done thus far. And then, as I said, but in my opening remarks, you're right on that cutting edge, and you haven't given up, and yet, in fact, more than anything, you just become more and more engaged, more and more intentional about your vision and your execution. So you've demonstrated that today, and I'm so happy that you did that, especially for our students, that this is an example of how to approach your life, how to approach your career. It's not just acquiring knowledge and then implementing. It's about who are you? What is your intention? What is your vision for your life? And then how do you actually execute that? And how do you bring that mantra or that way of approaching things to your work? How do you bring it to your design of your particular project? So I really, really want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I also want to just finally wrap up by just reminding everyone that we have four subsequent seminars, four subsequent case studies The first will be on December 7th, the next will be January 11th, the following will be February 14, and the final case study will be March 15. And then the last seminar in this series will be April 5th. And I've described each of those previously, so I won't go through those again. But the organizing committee will sort out how we actually go through these, and we will be using a scenario planning approach, and we are going to be in touch with each of the students and each of the principal investigator faculty for each of the case studies to have a 1 or 2 hour scenario planning workshop with Bruce in the coming weeks. And Bruce was going to lead us through his method for scenario planning. And we're going to use that method in each of the case studies. So I just encourage you to respond to your emails quickly when you get them from the organizing committee, so that we can make decisions quickly on how to actually go forward and how to really get the most out of this incredible opportunity for working with Bruce and working with each other. And that's one of the other things I just want to say. One of the great things about Bruce is that he brings out the best in others, right? And that's what we want here. We want our students, our faculty, to work together, to collaborate, to cooperate, to bring out the best in each other around the 4 case studies that we're going to focus on. And when we do that, we truly do create possibility. We truly do create future collaborative possibility. And that's really our critical goal. Now, let me just close the seminar by again thanking Bruce, thanking each of you for participating either in person or online. We've got about, I think it's almost 50 people online. And also, again, thank the organizing faculty and the organizing committee itself, students, and also, finally, most especially, Shauna, who is the sort of principal staff person really supporting this whole process, and who has thus far done a brilliant job. So thank you, Shauna. And thank you, everyone, for attending, and I look forward to seeing you on November 2nd. Thank you. December 7th. Today is November. Thank you.